the answers. So we'll get started. I'm not giving you the incredible resume of Veronica because I want her to tell us a little bit about her background and how she was influenced by her family and her family business, and then the great successes that have happened over the years. Some of which, you know, may keep her up at night, others won't, but we'll talk about all of those kinds of things. Please engage in this conversation. As you can see, I can talk a lot, so just if you engage, then we can enjoy it, okay? We'll get started. Veronica, as I said, I'm not giving your amazing resume of all of the projects that you've done, as well as the community efforts that you've been involved with. So I'm going to start by asking you if you could give me a little bit of your childhood background, education, community involvement, and then we'll move on.
Well, I was born in, first of all, thank you so much for including me this evening. Natasha and I have known each other since we were, I don't know, 13, 14 years old. Natasha and my sister Alicia, who's in London today, otherwise she would be with you this evening, have been like sisters since childhood, and I want to thank you always for being there. You're a wonderful person. As everyone says, you have a heart of gold and an intelligence that's to be shared and to be definitely praised. You know, childhood is very defining, and I think that the first thing that is most important is the parents that you're born with. And I was quite fortunate to be born to a mother and father who were excited about having a child and have always given me the utmost of love. Demanding in particular, but love has never been lacking in my household, or support. So regardless of what happens in one's lifetime, it's always that base of coming from a loving family and from a supportive family that I think determines a lot who you are. I was born in 1955 in Havana to a Peruvian mother whose father was the ambassador from Peru, and a Cuban father who had gone to school very early in the United States because the Jesuit priest weren't so happy with his older brother. So when they decided to expel his older brother instead of Fidel, which was in the same class, all the boys came to prep school in the United States. So Dad is very Cuban, but he spent most of his life in the United States. Having been born in 1955 was a challenging year because it was the golden era of Havana, but it soon turned into a very different country. And that is probably, after my parents, the most defining thing. I left Cuba in 1961. I was 6 years old. I left with my sister Alicia. Though we were not part of the Peter Pan thing, it just happened to be that day my parents couldn't leave. My father was in the Cuban underground, and my mother, as she always makes these great decisions, had determined that her place was next to her husband because she felt fairly certain that if she didn't stay next to Dad, that Dad would be shot, as so many of his friends were. So Alicia and I were put on a plane, and at 6, I was told, take care of her, and you know, you grow up fast. But when we arrived to this great country, our nanny was waiting, and so were my grandparents. So my first remembrance of this wonderful country was the warmth and the protection. My last thoughts in Havana was these huge guys at customs, whatever it was, telling your good friend and my sister that you could not leave with 2 toys. So Alicia had 2 toys. We had our toy that we had to take, and one of my father's friends had come and given us another. And since you know Alicia, at 3 she was not going to give up her other toy. No, Alicia was not giving up that toy. So one of my first best negotiations was to explain to Alicia that upon us leaving these 2 big guys, maybe they were not so big, but they seemed very, very big to me, that I would promptly give her my other toy and she would be just fine. So though it happened, you know, they opened up the suitcase, and I remember Mother had put a picture of Alicia with her and Dad, and for some reason a picture of me with Dad. And then they closed these suitcases and off we went. The American stewardess could not set foot on Cuban territory because she was only able to come down the stairs. So she greeted these two little girls that were dressed the same. I remember exactly what I was wearing. And we went up to that plane, and the relief that I felt when that plane took off, and at the same time, the situation of knowing my parents were staying in danger. You know, 6, you're old enough to know, but you're still 6 years old. So the first thing Alicia did is turn around and she clicked her. But that's very defining, because I do know what it is to live in a country where if you're not afraid, you're not being reasonable. And to come into this country and being greeted, the moment I got off being greeted, I had a letter. My father had handed possession of us to the nanny, who she kept till the day she died at 92. And in the warmth of this country that I have been so privileged to grow up in. So those things are very defining.
Very. And so you grew up in the south part of Miami. You attended schools.
Grew up in Coral Gables. As the family did better, the house got nicer. We kept on moving in Coral Gables.
So when did your parents When did your parents?
My parents came 2 months afterwards. Thank God. You know, when the Council's police came to find my parents, my dad, somebody had called my father and warned them. Dad walked out of the house, got taken to the Mexican embassy. The Mexican ambassador was a friend of my grandfather, who was ambassador in Venezuela. And the Mexican ambassador took my father out on the first flight after the Bay of Pigs to Mexico. And then, you know, about 2 months later, they came to the United States. To my grandparents' house. My grandparents had all their grandchildren because all their sons were fighting against the regime. So it was a house full of grandchildren and amazing grandparents too.
And did your parents start the business as soon as they came?
My mother, I grew up with a mother who did not work, because when my parents arrived here, they never spoke too much about what happened. I think they're talking about it more now, especially Dad. We can get some stories out of him now. But Dad went to work, whatever job he could find. You know, his English was perfect. Mother really didn't know how to do anything. In fact, that's probably the reason she went into real estate. She didn't know, you know, when she got married, my grandmother, who did real estate in Peru in the 1940s, so my mother's mother was the first one.
So this is 4th generation.
This is 4th generation. My grandmother, who was very wise, called my father and said, look, your wife, future wife, doesn't know anything, so I suggest you take Lala, which was the nanny who was in the States waiting for us, because I don't want to take any returns, and she can't do anything. She's beautiful, but she can't do anything. So Dad took Lala and my mother, and when we arrived here, Mom really didn't do anything. We went to live the first year in Washington, D.C. I went to Stonebridge, to the Sacred Heart School.
Right.
My mother went to the nun at the Sacred Heart School, and the nun was from New Orleans, and she said to my mother, I understand what it is to be a foreigner, because I feel like a foreigner in D.C. And I'm going to take your daughter, even though the term had started. So my first year was in D.C., where I learned how to speak English, and where my parents spent their first winter. They wanted to get Dad as far away from Miami as possible. When we returned to Miami, my father started working in the sugar industry, doing whatever he could do. And Mother just would drive there on the weekends. I distinctly remember singing to the car so it would start. Mother has always had the ability to make any situation seem worthwhile. And it wasn't until the late 1960s that Mother caught on that if you found a property for someone, you could actually get paid, because her mother kept on sending friends. She would refer them to this lady called Ann Moore, I remember, and Ann would get a commission to take my mother to lunch. So that's how it started. My grandmother sort of always giving her daughter advice, and Mother in the late 1960s going in, spent a year working for another company. I think we can both say your grandmother's a visionary.
Yes.
She has the pulse of knowing where things are going to happen, and she just is very passionate about what she thinks. She was the property that she bought with Dad, and some say they sold everything. I remember she said, "Thank God your grandfather gave you Woolworth stock, because all the other grandchildren had Cuban stock." I had been given Woolworth stock, and on top of that, I was the granddaughter, who he was the godfather to. Oh. And he had been surpassed. The first grandchild was not made, so it was very generous. So they took that. I think she went and left her silver somewhere else. She says, "Well, I went to pick it up afterwards," put everything together, and bought a piece of land. And then became partners with Mimi's parents, with Maurice and Foray, right, which they had all met because we were going to the same school when we came back to Miami.
And Mimi's parents were from Puerto Rico? The Forays were from Puerto Rico?
Her mother was from Venezuela, and her dad is from Puerto Rico. And they actually met because in that time, Miami was so small that they got Mimi's mother and my mother mixed up because both ladies spoke Spanish. So I would go out, and I would find Mimi's mother waiting for me, and Mimi would go out and find my mother. And that's how these two ladies became friends, and then the husbands became friends. And Dad did work for Maurice Foray for many years. Maurice Foray gave my father the first break that the parents had, made him the head of a company within his organization. Always used to tell Dad, "You're the only one who's making money for me." And so Maurice, we always remember that Maurice and Mercedes did give my parents a really helping hand in a very difficult time.
And so that may have come out of being able to speak Spanish.
It did. I think it's too late. We're constantly being confused.
And how did your mother get labeled as the Queen of Brickell?
The Queen of Brickell came after Harry Helmsley. And Lorinda who's in the audience. I think by the time I was at the University of Miami, Lorinda and Bernardo came down to Miami and their partners. And in talking, I went home one day because I think it was Elizabeth who said to me, "Your mother's in real estate, can she help us get a project?" And I went home and I said, "There's this Peruvian guy who's just started, and his partner and all came and said if you could give them a hand." So my mother says, "Who's the young man?" So-and-so. He says, "Oh, I know the mother, I know the family." And Mother had the opportunity, there's a little project called the Babylon. And they met, and so Bernardo and Lorinda and the whole group got the Babylon. And after that came Harry Helmsley, and your Arquitectonica was doing the Helmsley project. And Mother called Harry Helmsley, and Harry Helmsley called her in. As again, in only this great country. She actually thought it was a joke when they said Harry Helmsley was on the phone. So she went up to meet them in Palm Beach, saw Harry, and when she was walking out the door, Mrs. Helmsley said to her, "Alicia, I really like you, and you need this job. I'm gonna have Harry give you this job."
Oh, really?
So I was the driver, and she comes back down and says, "I wonder how strong the wife is." Now all of us know about the So the next day, Harry did call, and she had the job. So that kind of started, and Arquitectonica was the architect for this beautiful building, which I think defined what it was to have luxury in Brickell Avenue. It brought a new era. The architecture was very modern, very innovative. It was the views in that building, still to this day, are the most beautiful views on Brickell Avenue. The floor plan is a beautiful flow through. So it's been 30-some years, and it's still a floor plan that lives in today's world. So that was the first project, and then we did the Atlantis.
How was it that, so then you went to high school, you went to college?
Well, I had gone to high school
already. And what was that
already.
transition after college to become a part of the family business?
Well, when I was in high school, at the end of my high school years, my mother went to the University of Miami to take the real estate course, which was how it was done at that time. And Dad said, "Go with your mother, she can't walk in the parking lot by herself." So I did my homework, and my mother took the course. When I was at the university, Mom would, my sister and I would share a car. Alicia, you know what sharing a car with Alicia meant. I never had a car. Right. So Mother would pick me up quite often. And wherever she wanted to go, she did an open house on Sunday. One of us went. I remember that the first tool that we really bought was when we decided that it was much better to get a hammer to drill the for sale sign than to actually try to do it with your shoe. So we really started at that time people would come in, they would sign. So we always accompanied Mom.
You are right.
So much because, you know, Dad was always very supportive and
Right.
always suggested it. And we said yes, you know, we were a family trying to find our way in a new country, and everybody was helping everybody else.
That's great. And then your younger brother came along.
My
and-
younger brother was the Catholic surprise in the family.
Oh, okay.
Because I'm 13 years older than my brother, and things happen. And February has 28 days. And so we have a brother, which is the smart one. Alicia and I always say he's very smart because he went off on his own with family encouragement always and started doing his own deals. So I think he's on the way back from hunting where.
And so when you made the transition and your mother offered you, was it a conversation that your mother came and said, I'm going to offer you a full-time job here, opportunity?
Natasha?
Or
No, my mother.
I know, I'm trying to share with them.
It just happened from that day, from the time that I went with her to classes, to the time of the open houses, to the time of driving her to the Helmsleys. And then as I was getting ready to just sort of go off on my own, Dad said, it was my father, but my father is usually the catalyst in the family. When something big happens in my family, he's sort of the man behind the scenes. So Dad said, I'd like you to work with your mother for 6 months. If at the end, my mother never offered me a job. If at the end of 6 months, you don't want to do this, I understand, but I'm going to ask you to help her for 6 months. She has this big project, the palace, and after that you can do whatever you want. So here I am. And that project was in the 1970s.
And the subsequent projects that you worked on Brickell Avenue, if you could just
Well, you know,
name
Brickell,
a couple of them.
the palace was a very interesting project because here we have a big New Yorker coming down and taking an interest in Miami. And Harry Helmsley was a very hands-on person. He would come in, people had airplanes, and then Harry Helmsley had an airplane. So he would arrive in, I don't know, 727, this huge thing, and Leona Helmsley would come down in her jeans and her white shirt always. And Mr. Helmsley, an incredibly kind man, would visit the project about every other month. And I would go pick them up because we were a firm of about 5 people. And everyone said, well, you go pick her up because if you make a mistake, your mother's not gonna fire you. So I would go pick them up, and you know, wonderful memories of Mr. Helmsley and how kind he was. And I remember one thing that Mr. Helmsley said, Veronica, when the market isn't good, there isn't anything that you can do to turn around the market except take care of your client the best you can.
That's very good advice. And so you've been doing that, going forward with many different developers. Any of them you could name here
I
tonight?
think that developers have very different personalities. And I think that if you're a mother, you have an advantage because often your developers are, to a certain degree, like your children. You know, they have their great days, they have their challenging days, but you're always very loyal and you're always there trying to understand and trying to bring forth things that are important to them. They're wonderful people that I remember. Marty Margulis. Marty Margulis is the type of man that if you call him at 3 o'clock in the morning, he will be there for you. And I had the opportunity to represent him for many years. At the same time, Sheldon Lowell, his partner. You couldn't ask for a more generous man. Sheldon and Marie are people that, I know Sheldon is your mentor, Alexandra, and very, very good friends. We've represented David and the Martin family here in Coconut Grove, and we love to work in Coconut Grove because it's a dear neighborhood to us. You know, I went to school at Carrollton. I've seen the Grove develop, and Pedro and his son David are wonderful people, and they have brought in something very new to Coconut Grove. They've raised the bench again in Coconut Grove. We also have done a lot of work with Jorge Perez. You know, Jorge is very quick to react on anything that you tell them. So he is the type of person that if you go and have a conversation with him and share something that might be helpful to the project, he executes very quickly. So, you know, he also brings a lot to our marketplace. Yeah. And, you know, today we have like
Reed Warren and who is in his partner Taylor, I think you couldn't ask for a nicer person than Reed. Often I look at Reed and see how he deals with the people around him and his staff and things like that, and you just want everything to be absolutely perfect for them. But in the case of somebody with Reed's personality, it takes on a whole new definition because he's just so kind and so considerate and so thoughtful.
And so, Alexandra, how was the transition for you from college to being full-time with your family's business? And was it a job offer? Was it a sit-down conversation? Was it just joining your mom every day? How did you fare through that transition?
Well, my parents and my family always express that we should do exactly what we enjoy. And if the family business was something we wanted, great. If not, you have to do something, but you have to like it as well. And I grew up going to architect meeting, construction sites, sales centers. I used to take all the pens. You know, things that I thought was a normal childhood apparently is not. So I think it was a calling at a young age. I used to go a lot with my grandmother to architecture firms and restructure floor plans. I used to travel with my mother a lot. She would offer, who wants to go to Monaco for a week? I'm like, great, what time, what hour? I was 17, why not? So I kind of fell in love with the business, the interaction. And when I graduated college, I chose and kind of created a job for myself within the company. I wasn't asked, I kind of just said, I'm gonna be here, let me know how to do it.
And this is going to be a part of it. And then it seems to me that you've done many more commercial projects, or you've been representing commercial developers as well. Can you, or tenants, and can you talk to those, please, and some of the businesses that
So I initially started in development sales, representing Epic, and as my clients were weaning off of buying residential units, they started to take an interest into commercial, and this was a whole new field. I think even for us, we do commercial transaction, but we're not as public, and they're not like the JALs of the world. But we have a bunch of clients who have been seeing, so I kind of fell into it. I also went back to school to learn all the commercial transactions and how to negotiate a lease and what a triple net was. And I have a lot of Mexican clients who buy retail space. I take care of leasing it for them. We're currently also doing a medical office space in Aventura that's pre-construction ground up. We have done as well, Mom sold the land for Four Seasons in Brickell. We've done a couple of transactions of that such. And
so your mom sold the land, the land under the Four Seasons, right, to the Four Seasons to create the development.
Your aunt, your grandmother, all of us.
Right? Yeah, but I just wanted to describe the transaction because we think of you so often as just luxury condo sales.
Exactly.
So
we've done a couple landmark transactions and we're not so publicly known about that.
Right.
We've represented, we were the first to bring Zuma's group to the United States.
Oh, you did?
We represented both sides of the deal at Cervera as well. And one of our agents is their tenant rep.
Can you get us complimentary dinners?
Natasha, that's the phone call we get, like, and Saturday, and Sunday brunch. Exactly. Can you get me 10 people at 10 o'clock at night?
Right. We love that. Great.
And we also did Le Petit Maison for them as well.
I don't know if any of you've been to Le Petit Maison, which is off of Brickell Avenue, but it's a special treat. I would say an anniversary treat, if you can do that.
Just to name a couple, and
well, there's the deal that we did, you introduced. I found your father, thank God, knew a lot more than we did about the deal. But we did Cinemex now in Gulfstream. And it was a relationship that Alexandra had, and then she brought it to the office, and we started looking, and I have gone to see other sites in the United States. But our relationships are what bring us the commercial deals. It's sort of the phone call, we know you, we know
trust you.
that kind of thing. It's a relationship.
We have the resources to pick up the phone call, and for example, the commercial space for Legitimación was not even for sale. I had a very good relationship with the developer. We were also selling the project. I said, look, I have someone who wants to buy it all cash, we'll close, but you need to let me pre-lease the space before we actually close. And it's because of those relationships that I was able to negotiate the lease. It took us 13 months. I'll never forget that. It's the hardest negotiations I've had to do. And you know, it helps having those connections and have the ability to pick up the phone. And being a family that grew up in Miami, we have that ability where you still know who owns what and where, and the connection is one person away or a phone call away.
And in the case of that transaction, the phone call away, we're in Mexico. Alexandra says she doesn't feel well, and I call one of my old friends. She immediately comes with medication. I give the medication to Alexandra for 2 days, and Alexandra says, I'm so sleepy. She calls and she says, stop giving Alexandra that medicine. My mother just called, those are my mother's sleeping pills. So I have to go to
The trials of being in family business together.
But the advantage of being in a family business is that I could call my mom and tell her, I need you to help me with this deal while, you know, I'm incapacitated. So it's nice to have that ability of working with my family, and when there's a problem, you know, it's a phone call away. It's not a corporation. I used to work at Morgan Stanley and UBS in the private wealth management, and it wasn't for me. It was too hierarchical. There's a ton of paperwork to fill out, and I felt like I wasn't accomplishing as much as I could being in a family environment. Yes.
And so, as you continue and go forward in the future, what do you think the challenges of a family business?
People thinking it's nepotism and earning respect in the company. I've been 10 years as of May in the company, so I think I've kind of gotten over that hurdle, but it was a struggle. And
so in other words, they always wanted to talk to your mom, or you wouldn't?
it's more people thought that I got the job because of my family, which is true.
Right.
And it takes a while. I'm an introvert person, for people to understand that it is hard work, and I'm first one in, last one out, kind of. And just kind of gaining that respect where people can come to me and ask for advice or help and get things done. And for many years I worked more on the sales department, and now for the last 9 months I've worked on more of the corporate side of the business to try to make changes for the next generation.
And so you have the beautiful brains in the family, and we are going to ask you if you'll give us a little bit of your statistics in terms of how the market is doing, what great sales, volume has happened this year. What do you think is going to happen going forward? How do you think sales are going?
So when Natasha and I were speaking earlier, when we did the deal, one of the retail deals of the restaurant in Brickell over 6 years ago, we negotiated $45 triple net, to now the asking is $100. So you can imagine how much the value has increased, and the limited ability to own retail and ground level is absolutely incredible how that market's been going. There's been a huge boom in Aventura for office condo, which there hadn't been since the 80s, and a unique position of the medical district is less than half a mile, so there's only certain plots, so you see an increase in demand. We've also seen a change. Brickell City Center's been a phenomenal.
Unbelievable.
Compared to New York, how the retail prices are affected, you have more than 40% of the retail in Fifth Avenue available for lease, versus in Brickell, in City Center, which is such a large amount of square footage, almost compares to how much available is in Fifth Avenue. And most of the spaces are, wow. So in New York, they talk a lot about ULI, how this is such an exceptional case to see how things are doing. So it's interesting to look. We've also had a huge boom in the industrial warehouse. A lot of foreigners have been calling us for the export-import. And several months ago, I called someone. I said, look, I have the ideal company that I think will fit for your space. I said, I think Amazon will be a good one for you. He goes, you're crazy, it's not gonna work out. paper came out, Amazon this, I'm like, how many blocks away is that from your house? Had you listened to me, we could have been Amazon's warehouse. So it's interesting to see the trends, constantly being creative. When I look at a commercial space, I think, who's the right tenant? Can I sell it for them? And if I don't feel it, I'm not gonna take it on because our reputation lies with it.
Right.
So Wynwood is an interesting market, which I really like as well.
Yes. So we have the creator of Wynwood, one of the founders of Wynwood right here. Before Wynwood was Wynwood, Ron Cohn.
And it was the garment business.
Right.
We love Wynwood.
And
it's
it's really been a really super exciting market.
It's a neighborhood. It's a Lower East Side version of Manhattan where people have, I mean, I go there on a Tuesday and people are walking. It has its own life besides South Beach, which is what we've always been known for. And I'm happy to see that we've evolved into that kind of a city.
And do you think those prices are sustainable? I mean, do you think it's just going to continue to increase over time, or do you think that maybe we'll have a little bit of a lull here?
I think in terms of price right now, it's reached a good steady pace.
Right.
It's been a bit plateaued in price. It would be interesting to see what happens down the line in the future if all those ideas and those projected projects do actually take off.
And what percentage of your clients do you find are foreigners, and what percentage do you find are domestic?
Well, the great, Miami wouldn't make a profit without our foreign buyers. When I first went into the market, if you spoke Spanish, you could take care of everybody. Then you had to speak Portuguese, and along the line, you added other languages and other languages. But the thing with Miami is that it's very hard to convince a foreigner that he's not a local. They immediately feel like locals. So I constantly, when I'm looking at their sales report from our different projects, going up to my coordinator and saying, look, this person is not a local. Well, they told me they were from here. I said, they may be from here, but they're, this is like the second or third home, which is one of the attractive things about Miami, that people feel very welcomed in the city. But and we've had great people coming into the city. Look at the Austin Martin Tower that's going up. A great project, beautiful project, being very well received, and it's from the Cotto family in Argentina. This family could have gone to any city in the world, and they chose our city. And by the way, they are doing a fabulous job. My sister's with them this weekend in London, where there'll be an exhibition game of the Miami Dolphins. And the Cotto family through Austin Martin is a supporter of this. So you have very strong families from other countries coming in and being very active in Miami. You have the Melo family, which many of you have known, which have been very innovative, one of the first people to go into new neighborhoods, and they very much work as a family.
Yeah.
And they've done really, really well. They're delivering on their promises, and they're doing well. So our city has been very welcoming and very attractive places for people who have done well in their countries.
Our barrier of entry is far easier than New York. New York has old real estate dynasty families, so it gives people the opportunity here to create a history. I mean, so much for my family to have come and do what they've done.
So, what keeps you up at night, Veronica?
Almost nothing. I sleep very well. But what would keep me up? To me, I can start a conversation with just about anyone. I'm very fortunate to get people on the phone whenever I need to get them on the phone. But my true passion in my life is my family. And I'm just so happy to be at home in my kitchen and cooking. I really am very...
Veronica's a gourmet cook. Besides the many talents she has, she's an unbelievable gourmet cook for 6 people or for 60 people. That's what's so amazing.
I do love to cook, but please never ask me to play golf, because I can tell you my husband spent a lot of money getting golf lessons, and if you see me skiing, you really think that I'm trying to go over the mountain. So I am a very bad athlete. But it would be my family who, if anything, could keep me up at nights, because it is the the gift that you have, and the most important thing in anyone's life. And if anything motivates me to get up in the morning and do things, it's my family. And that's it. So I think if you have family, you know, you have faith. I think to be religious and to have faith is very important. And I'm a person of probably few words. If it's not about business or it's not in an open forum like this, I always say that people don't call me to have a martini, but they call me on the way to the emergency room.
So true. So true. As her sister and I were growing up together, we often called you on the way to emergency room.
I can do a martini, try me.
We called you for that or to cook for the party, because that was the best. We had the best of times. Do we have any questions from the audience? Is there something that you would like to know about? Because I can continue, and I do want to tell you that Veronica's grandmother, Veronica's mother, Alicia, and Alexandra's grandmother is going into the office every day. She couldn't be here tonight, she had another engagement, but she's in the office all the time. I don't want to tell you how old she is, because it just is not fair to her, because she looks like she's still dancing on high heels like this. I mean, she's unbelievable. So it really is such a great legacy, and
well, you know, Natasha, you're very dear to her heart. You know, you're absolutely one of her favorite people. And I want to tell you, Natasha, when we were all very young and still very new to Miami, was always very welcoming, and your mother in particularly was always so generous with her time and her love. So we really have go back a very long time.
Goes both ways, really goes both ways. Yes.
How large is the firm? Is it still just the five, the Fab Five?
The what?
Fab Five, how big is your firm?
Oh, we have about 350 agents.
Wow.
Alexandra is taking care of the general real estate, and my sister's daughter, Alicia, is more involved in the development side. So I think that the grandmother is very happy to have granddaughters that are very involved in what is the management part of the firm. I have a son who's also in the business, but we're fortunate that we have people that want to be involved in the business, so we've made it very clear that you should pursue whatever it is that you really want to do.
Great. Well, thank you. This has really it's been a joy for me, because although we've known each other for so many years, we don't get a chance to talk like this, because we're always running around after our kids still. But thank you for your friendship and your love, and thanks for being here tonight, because not an easy time to all get together, but we really appreciate it. You may hear from many of these people. I'm going to provide them with your contact information, and so please join us at CIASF events going forward. I think you're going to really enjoy what we do with the reports and the events that are on the table, by the way. So please take them with you.